have with me none other than the president of the National Letter Carriers Association, is it?
Yes, yes.
And it's Branch 11, which is named after one of your former members.
One of our former presidents, Chaz D. Duffy. He was a
Okay.
longtime president of our branch.
Well, Mack Julion, I want to thank you for coming on Talking Success. It's been a long time waiting. As I had mentioned to you earlier,
Right.
we're only in the studio once a month, and I have to crank out 2 one-hour shows. And we've had you on our guest list for quite some time. But everything is in divine order, because if I would have brought you on a year ago or 2 years ago, the issues that we're facing today as consumers or the public as it relates to our mail, and the issues that you're faced with through your leadership with the local chapter and the national organization or association, those things weren't present at that time.
No, I mean, it's a constantly evolving issue.
What is the basic issue for my viewers that may be familiar, may not be familiar, or may have forgotten because it hasn't been in the forefront of the news lately?
Well, first, Ranoule, thanks for having me on. We have to go back to 2006 when Congress passed the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act. In this bill, though it was a lot of good things for the Postal Service, allowing it to generate more revenue, there was a provision tacked along to it that required the Postal Service to pre-fund our retirees' health benefits for the next 75 years, and they had to do so within a 10-year window. This means that the Postal Service is obligated to pay $5.5 billion annually into our retirement fund for people who don't even work for the Postal Service yet, haven't even been born yet, for the next 75 years within a 10-year window. No other government agency, no private company would even think of doing such a thing, and no other government agency is required to do so.
Let's hit the brakes right there, because that's a lot to digest for my viewers, because they're very intelligent.
Right.
But sometimes, repetition is the mother of skill and understanding. So this money had to come out of the general revenue that you were generating. Is that not correct?
Absolutely.
And then your revenues went down.
The revenue went down. Realize we're in the middle of the greatest recession since the Great Depression. Mail volume has been declining over the past 10 years. With the internet, the technology, Facebook, tweeting, there's not as much mail as was in the system, say, 10 years ago. But the Postal Service, like any other company, has been making the appropriate business decisions. But it didn't need this burden tacked along to it, which is basically accounts for all the deficit that the Postal Service has reported over the past 5 years. If not for this requirement, the Postal Service would have realized over $500 million in profits in the last 5 years.
Let me ask you another question. Prior to this provision being taxed on or amendment to the legislation, how was the pension fund being funded?
The pension fund was, this requirement, as the Congress tacked it on in this bill, was to address what they thought would be an issue moving forward in the future. We have 2 pension funds, which, by the way, are also overfunded. We have the Federal Employees Retirement System, and we have the Civil Service Retirement System. Now, the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, did an independent audit at the behest of the NALC, because we had been reporting that we thought that this fund was overfunded. The OIG came back and reported that the Postal Service had overfunded the Civil Service Retirement System by some $75 billion. Now, another independent audit was done, and they discovered that it wasn't quite $75 billion. That was only overfunded by $50 billion. Okay. Our Federal Employees Retirement System, overfunded right now by $11 billion. So it's not a matter of the Postal Service not generating the revenue or not having the resources. The Postal Service still generates $65 billion of revenue annually. And all the expenses that the Post Office pay comes from the revenue that it generates from the selling of stamps and the services that we provide. None of the money that we get comes from the taxpayers.
And also, the United States Postal Service is an independent entity. It's not owned by the federal government. Is that?
That's correct. It's a we call it a quasi-government agency.
Right.
Since 1971, when it was converted from the old post office to what it is today, the United States Postal Service, it operates independently of the government in that our revenue pays all the expenses.
So we won't find United States Postal Service on any line item within the United States overall budget?
No, the only thing that the United States budget accounts for from the Postal Service is mail to the blind that they pay for, as well as mail to the servicemen. Everything else is paid for by the Postal Service, by our products.
So let me ask you this question. Does that mean that Congress does not have access to the pension fund, like the Social Security?
Well, see, here's something else.
Or am I going too
well,
deep?
No, a lot of people, that's a good question, because what a lot of people don't understand, a lot of our customers don't realize, is that the Postal Service is actually written into the Constitution. So that's what gives Congress the oversight in the Postal Service. And with this oversight, that's why laws have to be passed when there's changing of standards or anything that has to do with the Postal Service, because ultimately Congress has oversight over the Postal Service.
Well, you know, you just informed me. I need to cut away here because we have challenges sometimes. Again, you're watching Talking Success. Don't touch that remote. Put that remote down. Don't turn the channel. Don't run to the refrigerator. And I forgot to tell you on the front end of the program to turn your TiVo on. Any recording device that you have, your old school, and you got a VCR, it's not too late to put it in. This program will be repeated in 2 weeks from now. So whatever date that you're watching this on, 2 weeks from now, it will come on again. Let your friends know that you got some very valuable information about the crisis that exists within our postal system at the present time. So remember, don't touch that remote. Mr. Julion, can you pick up? I forgot, my turn jumped the track.
Okay. Well, we were talking about the Congress oversight with the Postal Service, and where the Postal Service is right now in terms of this crisis is that the Postal Service, because of this obligation of paying $5.5 billion a year, it had to go into some reserve funds, that is to borrow from the U.S. Treasury in order to sustain over the past couple years. Now, if it was not for this burden, this $5.5 billion a year, the Postal Service would be turning a profit, and there would be no need to access funds from the United States Treasury.
You know, it's unheard of to hear about a pension fund that's overfunded.
Yeah.
On the state, county, city has many. They've got the Chicago Municipal Pension Fund. You got Chicago Teachers Union Fund. I think the Park District has a fund. CHA has a pension fund. You got all these, and I think some of them all belong to Chicago Municipal Pension Fund, like CHA and the Park District and some of the others. But to hear about a pension fund that's overfunded. Now, originally, this provision that was tacked onto the legislation was a preventive strategy.
Yeah.
So that we would not run into a problem in the future for the new hires.
Right.
Not having adequate funding to take care of them down the
Well,
road.
that was the way it was being sold. The bottom line is the Postal Service, just like every other government agency we're seeing on a statewide level, we even seeing on a city level here in Chicago, you know, as you mentioned with the teachers, being under attack. Labor is under attack. And this great American institution, the United States Postal Service, has not escaped that attack. That burden was placed on the Postal Service in order to create this crisis, to make it fail. The Postal Service, as it stands right now, is very viable. Obviously, the first quarter of this fiscal year, the Postal Service realized a profit, an operational profit of $200 million. Yes, it was reported that the Postal Service lost $3 billion in the first quarter. That's because they had to add on or account for the $5.5 billion that it has to pay out this year. So our solution to this problem, or we think the obvious solution, is to remove this burden. This fund already has $43 billion in it. The OIG came out recently with a separate report that stated that if the Postal Service just over the next 20 or 30 years let that money sit and gain interest, it would have enough to fund the retirees. Now, here's an interesting...
So what's the game that's being played?